Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. This introduction is, well, I'll call it day one, but I started a video this morning, got sidetracked onto the air plants and made that one self-contained, if you know what I mean. So I'm starting another one. Then I got interrupted in watering with Postman Pat and an unboxing video, which yeah, well, that's there. So what I plan to do is during the rest of today I'll pick up on some things, but I'm not going to finish my watering today, so the rest of this video is going to take place tomorrow, and it's going to be bits and bobs. But what I want to do in this video is a form of update. So it's a case of where are the things that have changed? Yeah, where are the new buds? Where are the new spikes? Where is anything going downhill fast? You know, those sorts of things. So it'll be bitty, but you know, it'll come together as a video sometime during tomorrow, which is Wednesday. So if you're watching it, it probably is Wednesday. Oh, I'm not doing that again. But anyway, this is just to get this video going and a form of update, but you know, not all the plants, obviously, not this time of year. I'll wait till the end of the growing season and do a fuller update. This is just major changes as I go along, so we'll see how we go. You'll have to put up with the fan noise on some of these little clips because I need to get on, basically. I can't keep turning them on and off. But this little Orchid fastuosa, that looks like two spikes starting. Can't guarantee it, but looking at the size of the roots, they are pretty small and fine. I don't see why it should change its nature of how it produces its roots. So those big fat nubbins there look like they might well be spikes. Now they're very slow progress, Orchid, so we might be looking at spring before the flipping blooms come. They are slow, but it's a start, yeah? So we'll see how that one goes. As I say, having lost the blooms on my Orchid decariana, annoyingly, it'd be nice to see some more Orchid blooms coming on. So that looks promising. That really does look like two spikes starting out. That'd be good. Now my two little Coelogene fimbriatas, I did have three, but I've recently sold one. They've both got buds forming. I'll only film one, but you can see the buds pushing up nicely on those two growths. Okay, it's only two, but in the time I've had this plant, which is a while now, I've only ever had one single bloom. And this was mounted for quite a long time, and although it seemed to be growing okay, it only ever produced one bloom, whereas now it's grown quite a few new growths. That's lots of little pieces, it's not one plant. It just all got spread around and stuck in a pot to see what would happen, and they seem to have taken okay. And this is an autumn bloomer. It's a once a year type bloomer under normal circumstances, and it's an autumn bloomer, so we'll see how quickly those develop. They should be reasonably quick, but we'll see. Accidents happen, but when they're preventable, there was language. Basically, I've just knocked two pots over, and I'll class that as totally my own fault for putting a plant in a stupid place that was a bit precarious in the first place. So basically, every cloud has a silver lining. This is the culprit. That spike there was up here, there, yeah? And I had my Hercoglossum here, and as soon as I took it off the rack, the leaves caught on that spike, tipped it over, and took this one with it. There's a bonus. Having taken the top layer of bark off, I can actually see several new growths on this plant that I didn't know were there. And in addition to that, it just proves that plant was potted too deep. You don't want Dendrobium new growths coming out below the media. They need to be above it. So that was a blessing in disguise. Taking that top layer off was a bonus. We've got two new growths coming on that one. I'll live with that. Don't think the blooms are going to be out much longer. This will be the last one to go, but when they get that papery look, I mean, that one's on the way out anyway. This one's going to follow it in the next couple of days, so it's good to see some new growths, because I don't think the other canes are going to spike. You know, they're older canes. This is the largest, so most viable cane, and it needs some new ones. So a couple of new ones coming on nicely that I didn't even know were there. So I'll class that as a bonus. But the language was atrocious. Luckily I didn't have the camera in my hand. But you know, there are some other bonuses you can think of. If I'm wide awake and it's the middle of the day, the chances are the United States and Canada are sound asleep, so they didn't hear the language. I suspect they heard it on the space station though, if they were awake. Anyway, job done, mess cleared up, sorted out. That one came right out of its pot, so I've effectively had to repot it. Which, you know, it hasn't long been repotted, it's now been disturbed again. That's going to have set that plant back. But luckily at the moment there's no new growths on it to have damaged or anything, but yeah, things happen, and we talk about them, and then we take a deep breath and we carry on because we've still got work to do. Now, when I said I'd include anything going downhill fast, I didn't actually expect to include anything going downhill fast, but this is day 2 now of bits and bobs, and I've just walked out here and found that on the floor. Those are Oncidium type leaves. The only place they can come from is that plant there. Yeah, I mean that's the latest growth on that. That's 2 plants in the same pot. That's the latest growth. To drop its main leaves, there's a problem. You can see the problem straight away. That leaf has rotted off. That is soggy at the base. How about the others? Difficult to tell. Yeah, that one is as well. Look, you see the staining. So either some water's just got in there and it's reacted badly, or there's something wrong with the plant. One of the two. Let's get it out and have a look. You remember the soggy one I had before? It needed incredibly fast action to deal with it. And this may be... Yeah, the pseudo bulb still seems firm, but obviously there's something wrong. That may be a consequence just of, because it's over potted in effect, because I didn't have the right size pot to put each individual plant in. There's 2 bits in there. It stays wet too long. It's also got an overdose of algae in this one, as a consequence of staying wet too long, I suspect. So that one's going to have to go out and be dealt with, and I'll probably end up dumping this part of the plant. Yeah, there is a slight feel of sogginess on that latest growth on there, and also it doesn't seem firm on the plant, so that bit's gone. This bit looks okay, don't touch it. This bit looks okay. The spike's going over anyway, so it won't hurt to come out of the pot. So we'll put that one in there and deal with that later. The fact that I'm only repotting that part now, so I'm not touching anything because I've been touching manky leaves. If it is some sort of fungal or bacterial problem, the last thing you want to do is spread it around. So I'll repot this bit into a nice small pot, take the spike off, and see if that part will progress. It's a shame actually, because the best 2 blooms on that plant are on the part that I've now got to throw away. Still, stuff happens, doesn't happen often. When I did my Oncidium Alliance videos, somebody said, "What happened to the Psychopsis then?" Well, I forgot them and they were buried at the back basically, so I said I'd get them in a video as soon as I could. The that's a flipping mealybug. Oh dear, they get everywhere. No, it's just one adult. I'll kill that in a minute when I get my nail in there. The bud on this one is showing its colour, so that's going to open soon. That's the one with no red on it, that's an alba. So, but progress on the plant is I do have active root tips now, at long last. That had virtually no roots when I potted it up, and as a consequence it was just sitting on some moss with some sponge rock, giant perlite in it, just to keep some air around there. And it is Oh, there's actually a new growth as well. It just goes to show you've got to pick them up and look at them. Yeah, it's also pushing out a new growth. So that one is sound now, with new root tips, new root growth, and a new actual growth coming along. That one's going to make it. This one I am far from happy with. Although its latest growth is quite good, it's difficult to tell because these have been in a poor state for a long time. And the bud on this one is actually swelling, so it's going to flower again, but it's only got one spike, so I've got to be careful. But the pot is just far too big. If I water this now, that's going to stay wet for ages. It's still wet down the bottom from last time I watered it, but it's bone dry at the top where the potential for the root growth is. So there are signs of root movement there, so bull by the horns, another one for the kitchen. I just need to get that in a small pot with some moss and some small bark around the base without sinking the pseudo bulbs in, so that at whatever point this new growth pushes its new roots out, I've got it, and then it doesn't need to be disturbed. These have a reputation for not liking having their roots disturbed. Some say they don't take a blind bit of notice, but I still think it's down to catching it right. And with some plants, it's far more important to get that timing right than it is with some others who really aren't fussed one way or the other. But this one has a reputation for not liking disturbance. But these roots are viable, they're capable of branching, but they're not going to do that sitting on the top of bone dry media. So I need to get at that one. Okay, while I've got this one out, this is Miltonidium melissabriani, and it's doing a strange thing. Its latest growth over here, which is the one with the spike on, I'll get to that, but out of the back of the plant it's pushed up 2 new growths. Now that's good, because that pushes the plant in a different direction, and I'll be very surprised if the latest growth doesn't shoot out as well as soon as these have finished. But let's hope they don't finish in the near future. They've only just opened. Yeah, that's difficult to beat, both colour and pattern. Now unfortunately that spike was dangling and it was just getting knocked, so I've had to stake it, and that changes the aspect of the blooms unfortunately, so they're pointing a little bit skywards, but one of them is hanging down, so I've got at least one that I can face. There's another couple of buds still to open yet as well. So that's a good spike on that plant, just opening at the top. But yeah, I mean the colours on that are pretty good. It's not just the colours, it's the pattern. And being a Miltonidium, this is one of those names that is a nuisance, because you're not quite sure what the Milton bit on the front is that Miltoniopsis or Miltonia? Now I suspect it's Miltonia. Miltoniopsis doesn't get merged in with other stuff much. Miltonias do. And then obviously there's some Oncidium in there. And quite honestly, I would suspect that the Oncidium part of that was probably Odontoglossum once, just because of the shape of the bloom, the patterning and the colour. Yeah, so the chances are a lot of the colour has come from a Miltonia, because a lot of those are purple, and then, you know, the size of the bloom and everything else is probably some Oncidium that was once Odontoglossum pushing out there. I'm sure I could look it up and find the parents if I could be bothered, but I don't need to. It has a name, as if it hasn't changed, of course. So that's well pleased with that spike. Lovely blooms. That has to be up in the list of favourites. It just can't be not a favourite, not with colours like that. It's gorgeous. I've stopped on this one, not for an update as such, but just for a nobile chat. Obviously nobiles should, don't always, but should put out their new canes either during the blooming, just before or just after, in the early spring, late winter, early spring. That's their normal pattern. And your job, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to feed them and water them well and get those new growths as big as possible while you have a growing season. Yeah? Because they will eventually stop. And I just wanted to look at this one. That cane has finished growing. That's its terminal leaf. It's not going to grow any more leaves, but it will still gain bulk. Yeah? This one, that may be its terminal leaf, maybe not. This one's still growing. This one looks like it's still growing. It may have ended. Yeah, so this is in different stages. Some of the canes have effectively reached their terminal leaf. They all do that eventually, and then they stop putting out any more new leaves. So you have to decide, at what point do I stop feeding them and declare winter? And the answer is as late as possible in my book, simply because the terminal leaf has appeared on a couple of canes. When this cane's still growing, it still needs feeding and watering well. And if that necessitates carrying on with that process right into the start of winter, then so be it. Now, if all of your canes have reached their terminal leaf, they're not going to grow any more new leaves. But what are they going to do with the feed and water they get from that point? They're going to store it up. They're going to build up strength in the plant, ready to produce that mass blooming, we hope. Fingers crossed and all that. This one needs a sort out. I'm going to take some canes off of this one and give it a bit of room to move, but that's irrelevant to the point I'm getting at. While new growths are still growing on a Dendrobium, if you stop feeding and watering, those new growths will stop. They might drag some energy out of the older canes and try and carry on, but they won't do it very well without the support from the root system, you know, hydration and some feed. So it's a strange decision to make, but at some point, you know, in the UK winter, this will be not growing anymore. And at that point, it won't need the feed and the water at the level I give it during the growing season. So it will tail right off. I'm not going to keep it bone dry, but I will let it get bone dry. And then instead of giving the pot an absolute soak like I normally do, it'll get more of a dribble. And at that point, in the depths of winter, with the short days, lower temperatures, there won't be any feed in that water. It'll just be enough to keep the plant hydrated and stop the canes starting to desiccate. Yeah? Now often, if that does happen, when you start watering and feeding again in the spring, those canes may plump up again, but they may not. If they go too far and get too crinkled and wrinkled, they won't plump up and they'll look awful, you know, and it just takes the edge off the look of the plant. So just a quick nobile thing, you know, that's an actively growing cane. It hasn't finished for the year yet, so it may be the last one. Well, no, that one's still actively growing. Some of them have finished, some are still growing. So I always err on the side of what's growing, and if it's still growing and still pushing up height and pushing out new leaves, I carry on watering and feeding. This plant is going to stop probably and finish growing within the next month, I would say, towards the end of October, at which point I can start easing off, so that it can have a bit of a rest, but it won't get a formal rest. I'll just keep it hydrated enough to stop it desiccating in any shape or form. And the fact that this was a showstopper last year, literally, 2 awards for this one at 2 different orchid societies. Blooms lasted ages and it was a mass. So if I'm planning ahead for that to happen, I need these canes to be in the right place, yeah, which means some of those old canes need getting out the way. So I'll get on to that one like end of next month, something like that. Give it a tidy up, possibly give the canes some support, try and get them a bit more upright, because as you can see at the moment it's 2.5 feet wide, so it occupies a 2.5 foot circle by nearly 1 metre high. It's a big plant. It uses an awful lot of space, and if it didn't have such good blooms, it wouldn't be occupying that space. It would be occupying that space in somebody else's place. But this is a good one. I like this one a lot, and this is going nowhere. I've been asked quite a few times to do an update on the holey clay pots. Holy moly. So I'll grab some of them. I'm watering them today anyway. Prosthetia green hornet is coming on okay. There's a few new growths coming on. This Cattleya, well actually it's a BLC, so a Brassolalia Cattleya, but I suspect the Lalia has been renamed, so it may still be a BC. It might just be a C. Careful. But anyway, the two latest growths on there, I see no reason whatsoever why those shouldn't bloom. They're better than any of the previous growths. They're fatter, yeah, and they both got sheaths. So, yep, doing well. It's got one hell of a support system underneath it. The root growth, since I potted it in there, has been tremendous. And the fact that it can just stay there now for so long, I'm expecting even better things after it's bloomed. Well, this is Encyclia prismatocarpa. Beautiful blooms if I ever get any. Two lovely strong new growths since it was potted up in here, pushing on nicely, and a reasonable root system's come out since it went on there. It's one of those that was on a mount and just didn't do very well, so I thought I'd give it a go in a holey clay pot. Seems to be pushing on okay now. This one I got from Equigenera at the Malvern show, so that was like the middle of June. I'm a little bit dubious about Equigenera, but I'd been after this particular plant for some time and it didn't look too bad, so I got it. Slalia purpurata, variant atropurpur. There's too many purrs in there, you read it. But when I got it, it had two little new growths on the front, which have, you know, I mean, they're pushing on nicely. So two strong new growths there. Quite honestly, I see no reason why one or both of those shouldn't actually spike when it gets to... they'll probably need to mature, but again, I don't know the variety. It's new to me. We'll have to wait and see. This particular sheath that was already on it, I didn't expect anything of it. I cut the top off in case there was anything lurking in there, but I don't believe that's going to do anything. I'm relying on the two new growths, but again, it's pushed out loads of new roots with those new growths, so yeah, coming on nicely. I'm looking forward to that. The blooms are pretty special. Now, these two were once one. I split the plant basically. It was growing in opposite directions and becoming too wide to accommodate sensibly, so I decided to split it into two because it had a lead going in opposite directions. This was in bloom earlier in the year, had two pseudobulbs in bloom at the same time with two blooms each. Huge, fantastic blooms. The actual plant in its original state actually got a second at one of the Orchid Society shows, so it's a... But it didn't take too kindly to being cut in half. So basically it has grown new root systems in both cases, and it has put up a single new growth in each case. So I do have a single new growth on each of the plants, but only one. Whether they're going to bloom or not, again, we'll have to wait and see. But at least it's grown roots. In both cases, one better than the other. That's a good root system for what it's done. And there's a possibility of an eye up this end pushing out. It may or may not. It's difficult to tell with Cattleyas whether they will do that or leave it dormant. We shall see. But anyway, a new growth with a sheath on both pieces, so we shall see if they bloom. I don't see why they shouldn't. You know, they've got a root system under them. You know, they should be okay. This is another no ID Cattleya. It's just nice orange blooms if we ever see any again. That aborted a new growth, but given the time of year, It probably had something to do with it. Not a good time to start new growth in the middle of winter. But later it pushed up this one. So it has got one single nice new growth which has got a sheath. And since it's got put in the holey clay pot, it's done the root thing. So it's got a good support system underneath it. So there's no reason why that sheath shouldn't bloom. And I haven't seen the blooms on that one for a long time. So they're a distant memory. So it might be nice to have them again. Now this one's Laelia anceps. It never actually did that well on its mount. It bloomed on the bulb that matured on that mount, and then it just seemed to stop growing. It just wasn't doing well. So with, like with the other Cattleyas, chuck it in a holey clay pot and see what it does. Well, what it did was push up two nice new growths for a start. It also chucked out a brand new root system, which it didn't have before, and both of those new growths have got spikes. Now they're a long way off blooming, but it's one of the few Cattleya types that bloomed. Absolutely gorgeous, and I forgot to take a flipping picture. But you can look Laelia anceps up, it's quite a common one to have. But yeah, two spikes at once, and they should mature around the same time. So, well, that's if they get there, of course. But coming on nicely now. Now this is my only monster cat. I call it that because of its sheer height and size of its leaves. This is a big plant. I got this at the Orchid Society auction, and it was funny actually because I won't buy a Cattleya unless I know what the blooms are going to be like, because there's quite a lot of Cattleya blooms I don't like. So I'm quite fussy, and I thought, well, that's all right, it's got a proper name, I'll Google it. Yeah, well, not in the middle of nowhere I won't, no flipping signal, so I had to walk up the road to get a signal to actually Google that Cattleya name, Angel Heart, to see if I like the blooms or not, and I did. And I got it quite cheap, simply because on the way to the auction, the guy broke that new growth off. Yeah, there was a little one coming out here, but this one was quite a good size and it was just dangling. He'd broken it off in transport, so it spoilt the look of the plant, so I got it really cheap. But that little new growth has pushed on nicely. Yeah, good size with a sheath, and yeah, there are swellings, so we should see the blooms on that, providing they make it. Just because you get your buds in your sheath, they can abort. They're not guaranteed at that point. But it's pushed out a good root system since it was potted in here. It's got a support system underneath this new growth. And, oh, it's a little spider. So I was just going to kill it. I don't kill little spiders, they could stay. The one thing I have noticed, though, is that on all the previous pseudo-bulbs, it's a twin-leafed. Yeah? Whereas this latest pseudo-bulb only managed one leaf. That's probably because as it was pushing up, it hadn't got its root system off the ground yet, and it had just been disturbed, unpotted, with a fair bit of root damage because the old media was pretty naff and it wouldn't come off. But anyway, one leaf or two, it's got a sheath, that's the important thing. So coming on, but that is a big one. What's that? I suppose that's 2'2", 2'3", maybe 2'4" high. It's a big plant. Still, on a top shelf, it's got headroom, so I can accommodate it. Right, these are the two rescue pieces that were lying around just bare on the shelf for ages and ages. They do seem to be growing. I mean, this one does have a new growth, and the three roots it had, one of them's burrowed down into the pot and heading out for one of the holes. Another one's down in the media somewhere, and the other one decided to go aerial. But it has some roots. Not many, there is only three, but I suspect the extra hydration from at least two of those being in media should trigger some more new roots alongside that new growth. That's the hope. This one is a bit behind. It only had a single root. That has grown since it was stuck in there and come out the side of the pot. I wish it had stayed in there, but once it's out, you'll only break it trying to bend it, but it's branched. If it's branched there, the chances are it's branching down in the pot as well. Yeah? So that extends its single root to have multiple growing tips, which means it'll, it'll grow better, faster, because it's got more growing tips on it. That eye is definitely moving, but whether it can be supported or not, we'll have to wait and see. And at the moment, that's the only viable one on that plant that I can see. So that's a wait and see. I'm pretty sure that's going to grow. That's going to make it. It'll be a very slow recovery, but you know, if this matures properly and produces a support root system, then it will grow on from that point. This one has got to get that growth going. Otherwise, there's just nothing there. I can see no other eyes anywhere that are viable. So that's its only hope, that little bit there. We'll have to wait and see, but at least one I'm pretty sure is going to make it okay and grow on, and this one may or may not. The Avanagara apple blossom managed to get itself singed. My fault. I didn't realise they were a lower light type. Well, I do now. Single new growth on this one. At the same time as that new growth started, it started effectively a new root system, because there was very little root system left when I repotted it under the old bulbs. So it sort of replaced its root system. Single growth at the moment. No reason why it shouldn't bloom on that growth. And what I'm hoping with the Cattleya types that have only produced a single growth following their repot into that media, in other words, a new life, I think the following year, or the following growing season, they should do quite a bit better. I'll put up with a single new growth. Once they've acclimatised, they've established themselves, grown all round the pot, all out of the pot and all that sort of stuff, I think the growth should start to increase with perhaps 2 or 3 leads at the same time. But that's a wait and see. You know, I mean, I haven't had the holey clay pots that long, so nothing really has been in them that long. But what is in them seems to be doing pretty good, so I'm pleased with the progress. Now this nobile is, this is the first year it's ever produced more than one cane in a single year, so it's doing good. And I've finally confirmed, absolutely without a shadow of doubt, that is Spring Dream Apollon. The reason being that this young plant here decided to bloom. Now the blooms have gone now, but while they were fresh, I compared pictures, leaf size, leaf shape and everything, and I can now confirm that's what this is. It's also a nuisance because it's decided to bud. Yeah? Now that's not this year's cane, that's last year's cane that's yet to drop its leaves, and it's decided to flower on some of the nodes now. Well, because the day lengths will shorten, well, even this year's cane's got some buds on. But this one, when it's sold, it has a massive blooming down the whole length of the cane. Normally only one, and that's how you buy it. And then those are normally produced out of season, they're forced, which puts the plant in a quandary as to where winter is and where summer is, so they do get confused. Now I'd have thought, as this is I think the 3rd year I've had it, it would have decided where winter and summer is by now, but maybe it hasn't. But a classic example of the new canes all have their terminal leaf. Yeah, that one's a poor one. That one started growing in the autumn, so that one grew through the winter. But yeah, I mean, it's got 2 good strong canes this year. Oh, there's more buds on that one too. So this is going to have a little autumn blooming. It won't spoil it for next year, because as these blooms progress, winter will arrive, day lengths will shorten, and this thing will go into almost dormancy, which will stop it budding anymore until late winter, early spring, when the longer days start and the temperatures climb a bit. So on the nodes that haven't been used, that's their job. That's where they'll come out. They'll come out late winter, early spring. And there should be quite a few of them, because I mean, that is a hell of a big cane. It's the biggest cane it's got. So my cane this year is the best one it's ever had. Plus it's got another good one round here. And as I said, that little one there. And this one blooms on every single node eventually. So these 2 are finished. They've actually bloomed on every single node right down to the base. So with the amount of leafage and the number of canes I've got on there, those 2 oldest canes, as they are the oldest, can now come off. That'll tidy the plant a little bit. I'm not taking this one off though. Yeah, That may still have a couple of nodes to go in the spring, so I'm not taking that one off yet, but those two at the back can go. So well, that's what you're looking for. Your nobiles are finished growing when that terminal leaf comes out. It's distinctly different from previous leaves. It sticks out like a sore thumb. It's easy to spot, and that means no more new leaves, but the canes are still swelling. They still bulk up. Yeah, so that's not the time to immediately stop feeding just because that terminal leaf's come out. I've still got 3 or 4 weeks at least of growing season here, and during that season these canes will plump up and store energy, and any spare will get pushed into the older canes, all storing itself up for what it's going to do late winter, early spring. So if you stop feeding them too early, you could be starving them a bit, which means they might not bloom as well in the spring. It's a balancing act. It's quite difficult to get your head round, but you know, when you've been doing it quite a few years, you can just see the signs. So that's where we are with that monster. So there we go then, an assortment of clips, some updates, some chats about nobile types, and update on the holey clay pots because that was asked for. And as I say, filmed over a period of time and just put together. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.